The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a chilling monument to power. Its marble floors gleamed under the cold, artificial lights of holographic projections, reflecting the severity of the moment. The Council's decision was final. A human girl named Moon, accused of inciting an insurrection against their alien overlords, knelt in the center of the hall. Her hair, a wild cascade of fiery auburn, framed her defiant face, her emerald eyes flashing with untamable spirit. "Let the sentence be carried out," boomed Zayler, the head counselor, his voice devoid of compassion. "The human shall serve as a lesson to her kind." From his hidden position in the gallery, Joran watched in horror. Disguised as a lowly courier, he had infiltrated the chamber, desperate to save Moon. But his station offered no means to intervene. All he could do was clench his fists as she was dragged toward the execution platform. At the far end of the chamber, the Council's monstrous enforcer, Valrath, awaited. The dragon's scales gleamed with an eerie black shimmer, and its golden eyes glowed with an unsettling intelligence. Valrath was not just an executioner. He was an instrument of domination, feeding on the bodies of the fallen. His massive form symbolized the absolute might of the Galactic Council. As the blade fell, Joran flinched, bile rising in his throat. Moon's head was severed cleanly and raised high, her expression frozen in defiance. Her severed head was placed in a crystalline tray, then offered to Valrath as a grim token. The chamber fell into an unnatural silence, all eyes on the dragon. Valrath's massive nostrils flared as he sniffed the air. He lowered his head to inspect the human girl's severed head. His golden eyes locked with Moon's unblinking gaze. A moment stretched into eternity. Instead of devouring the offering, Valrath nudged the head gently with his snout, letting out a mournful rumble that reverberated through the chamber. The shock was palpable. Murmurs rippled through the gathered council members, their expressions shifting from smug satisfaction to uncertainty. "What is this?" Zayler barked, slamming his staff onto the floor. "Consume it, beast." But Valrath refused. His growl deepened into a sound of sorrow and something more, rebellion. The handlers, equipped with control rods, moved forward, their hands trembling. One of them jabbed a rod toward Valrath. With a swift, violent motion, the dragon snapped the device in two, his powerful jaws crushing it to nothing. In the chaos, Joran saw his chance. The connection between Valrath and Moon was inexplicable but undeniable. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He rushed from his vantage point, running toward the beast. "Valrath!" Joran shouted, his voice echoing over the commotion. "They made you a tool, but you're more than that. You see it, don't you?" The dragon's golden eyes turned toward him, narrowing as they studied him intently. For a moment, Joran feared he might meet the same fate as the handler. But instead of a deadly strike, Valrath lowered his massive head, as though inviting Joran closer. The council guards surged forward, weapons raised, but Valrath let out a deafening roar, sending them scattering. Joran seized the moment. He scrambled onto the dragon's back, clutching his spine along his neck. "Take us out of here," Joran urged. With a mighty beat of his wings, Valrath launched into the air, smashing through the chamber's glass ceiling. The council chamber descended into pandemonium as the dragon and his unexpected rider disappeared into the dark sky, carrying with them the spark of a rebellion that would rattle the foundations of the galaxy. The cold night air bit at Joran's face as Valrath soared through the atmosphere, the dragon's massive wings cutting through the wind with ease. The chaos of the council was far behind them, but the weight of what they had just set in motion hung heavy. Joran clung tightly to the dragon's spine, his mind a mix of terror and exhilaration. "Where are we going?" he shouted over the roar of the wind. Valrath didn't answer verbally, but a deep rumble vibrated through Joran's chest. The dragon's golden eyes flicked back at him, a spark of intelligence flashing in them. They descended toward a jagged mountain range, its peaks shrouded in swirling mist. With a graceful dive, Valrath landed in a hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and glowing crystals. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, Jorn slid off the dragon's back, his legs unsteady. He stumbled, catching himself on one of the glowing crystals. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice shaky as he gazed up at the towering beast. Valrath regarded him silently for a moment, then turned his head toward Moon's lifeless head, still clutched in one of his claws. The dragon placed it gently on the ground, a mournful rumble escaping his chest. Jorn's heart tightened as he stepped closer. "You feel it too, don't you? Her loss." Valrath lowered his head, his snout nearly touching the head of Moon. The crystals around them began to glow brighter, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. Jorn stumbled back, his eyes wide in disbelief. Then, to his shock, Valrath released a deep, resonant hum. The dragon's scales shimmered with an ethereal light. The energy around Moon's severed head intensified, forming strands of light that seemed to extend beyond the remains of her body. The entire valley seemed to respond, the crystals pulsating in time with the hum. "What's happening?" Jorn whispered, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. The light flared one final time, then faded. As it did, a sharp gasp echoed through the valley. Jorn lowered his arm, his mouth falling open in disbelief. Moon was whole again. She collapsed onto the ground, trembling as she took in deep, ragged breaths. Her hand instinctively reached to her neck, feeling the smooth, unbroken skin where the executioner's blade had struck. Her wide green eyes darted around, taking in her. Chapter 2: The Reawakening. Moon's chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. The world around her seemed distant and surreal, as though she was emerging from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Her mind was still foggy, disoriented by the strange forces that had brought her back. Slowly, she lifted her trembling hand, touching her neck, expecting to feel the cold absence of what had once been there, but there was nothing. No gash, no wound, just smooth, unbroken skin. Her wide green eyes darted around, taking in her surroundings for the first time. She was in a valley, one that felt almost alive with its glowing crystals and the pulsating energy that hung in the air. The valley was shrouded by towering cliffs, their peaks hidden in a thick, swirling mist. But none of this felt familiar. It was like she had been pulled into another world, a place far from the cold, metallic halls of the council. She shot to her feet, her instincts kicking in. Her body trembled, but her mind was focused. She was alive. They had killed her. She had seen it. She had felt the blade slice through her neck. But now, here she was. She was alive, and that had to mean something. Her gaze shifted, locking onto the dragon. Valrath, the beast who had been poised to devour her, who had instead spared her life in a moment of strange defiance. He stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her silently with his piercing golden eyes, his massive form looming in the low light. What happened? Moon's voice was shaky, but her words carried an edge of determination. Valrath's head tilted slightly, his eyes flicking to Jorn, who stood nearby, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had been the one to call out to the dragon, the one who had somehow sensed the bond between them. His voice rang with a sense of urgency as he stepped closer to her. You're alive." "Somehow," Jorn said, his voice laced with wonder. "I don't know how, but Valrath, he saved you." Moon's heart skipped a beat. "Saved her?" She looked at the dragon again, her mind racing to understand what had just transpired. It was impossible. A mere human, killed before an entire council, only to be resurrected by a dragon? It didn't make sense, but there she was, alive and breathing. She took a cautious step toward Jorn. How do you know his name? And why did he save me?" Jorn hesitated, his eyes flicking to Valrath before meeting Moon's gaze again. "I don't know exactly. There's something about you, something he felt. It was like a connection. I think." He stopped himself, as though not sure whether to continue. He swallowed hard. "I think he's not just a beast. He's not like the others." Moon frowned, her brow furrowing. She had seen the way the dragon had rejected the council's order, the way he had refused to consume her. There had been something sentient in his eyes, something that felt deeply out of place in the halls of the Galactic Council, where they treated creatures like Valrath as mere tools to enforce their rule. Then, why? She asked, her voice steady now, the confusion melting into a sharp clarity. Why would he do this? Why help me? Joran took a step closer to her, his expression intense. Because you're not just any human. You've sparked something. You've awakened something in him. It's not just his nature as a weapon anymore. You're part of a bigger story. A story the Council doesn't want you to know. Moon's mind raced. She had been a part of a rebellion. A small resistance against the overwhelming might of the Galactic Council, hoping to topple their oppressive rule. But she had never expected this. Never expected to be resurrected by the very beast that had been tasked with executing her. Her thoughts were interrupted as the ground beneath them trembled slightly, the glowing crystals humming in unison. The air grew thick with energy, as if the valley itself was responding to something unseen. Valrath lifted his head, his nostrils flaring. There was a low rumble in his chest, deep and resonant. What's happening? Moon asked, glancing up at Joran, who seemed equally alert. Joran's eyes widened as he followed Valrath's gaze. They're coming. The Council won't let this slide. If Valrath's bond with you is real, if you're truly part of whatever this is, they'll send everything they have after us. They'll hunt us down. Before Moon could respond, the sound of engines grew loud in the distance, cutting through the silence of the valley like a blade. A squadron of Council ships, sleek, ominous, and armed to the teeth, swooped down from the sky, their engines roaring as they cut through the mist. They were fast, efficient, and precise. Just as Joran had predicted, the Council was already mobilizing. Valrath's massive wings flared, his eyes narrowing. He let out a deep, guttural growl, and in one swift motion, he was airborne, his enormous wings propelling him into the sky. Moon instinctively grabbed hold of one of his spines, her fingers gripping tightly as the dragon ascended. "We need to move," Joran shouted over the sound of the wind and engines. He jumped onto the dragon's back behind Moon, settling into place. "They're not going to give us a chance to explain. We'll need to get to the outer rim. It's the only place the Council won't have a direct hold over." Moon nodded, feeling the tension in the air as Valrath ascended higher, his wings slicing through the clouds. Beneath them, the valley rapidly disappeared, and the night sky stretched endlessly, a vast sea of stars above. As they soared toward the unknown, Moon's mind raced with questions. What was this connection between her and Valrath? Why had he chosen to save her? And what was this larger, dangerous story that she had unwittingly stepped into? But one thing was certain. She had survived for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it was leading her to something far bigger than the rebellion she had once fought for. And in the distance, as the Council ships followed them relentlessly, Moon realized with a chill that their pursuit was not just a battle for her life. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. Chapter 3. Into the Storm. The wind howled through the air as Valrath ascended, his massive wings cutting through the sky with unrelenting force. Below them, the landscape of the valley receded quickly, the swirling mist and glowing crystals fading into the darkness of the night. Moon's heart raced, her mind still struggling to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. She had been killed, and yet, here she was, riding on the back of a dragon, fleeing from the very Council that had condemned her. Joran's grip on her waist tightened as Valrath surged higher, his golden eyes scanning the sky, searching for any sign of their pursuers. "We need to head for the outer rim," Joran shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "It's the only place we'll be safe. If we can reach the uncharted sectors, we can lose them." Moon nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at her. The outer rim was a desolate, lawless place. It was where the Council sent those they wished to forget. But it was also where the remnants of the old rebellions, the ones who had failed, still lingered in the shadows. And it was where the last remnants of hope for true freedom existed. "Do you think they'll follow us there?" she asked, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. Joran hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "They'll follow us wherever we go. The Council doesn't let things slip away. But if we can find the right people, we might stand a chance. We're not just running from them anymore, Moon. We're running towards something. Something bigger. Something bigger. The words echoed in her mind as Valrath pushed through the sky with even greater speed. The stars ahead seemed to blur, the world a swirling mass of darkness and light. Moon clung to Valrath's spine, her mind whirling as the weight of Joran's words settled in. Bigger than the rebellion. Bigger than the Council. For the first time since she had been condemned, Moon allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more, something beyond the small victories of resistance movements, beyond the tyranny of the Council. Then the sound of engines cut through the wind. Moon's stomach dropped as she saw the glint of the Council ships in the distance, their sleek forms cutting through the darkness. They were fast, closing the gap with alarming precision. Even from this far away, Moon could feel their relentless pursuit. "They're gaining on us," Joran said grimly, his voice tinged with urgency. Valrath let out a roar, his massive wings beating with a renewed intensity. The dragon veered sharply to the left, banking to gain altitude. Moon's stomach lurched as they ascended, the Council ships following their every move with deadly precision. One of the ships launched a stream of laser fire, a streak of bright red light cutting through the night sky. The first blast missed by a wide margin, but the second one came closer, grazing the edge of Valrath's wing. The dragon let out a pained growl, his body jolting with the impact. Moon instinctively tightened her grip, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to lose them," Joran shouted. "Valrath, take us higher." Valrath's golden eyes flicked back at them, and in that moment, Moon sensed the dragon's understanding. The connection between them, the bond that had defied logic and death itself, was real. Valrath wasn't just an animal. He was something more. The dragon let out another roar, this one filled with fury, and with a powerful beat of his wings, he shot upward, breaking through the clouds. The ships below scrambled to follow, but their engines couldn't match the sheer force of Valrath's ascent. The cold air stung Moon's face as they soared higher, leaving the ships behind. But she knew they wouldn't be free for long. The Council had too many resources. They would regroup, strategize, and come after them again. It was only a matter of time before the hunt resumed. But as the night stretched on and the stars seemed to blink out one by one in the wake of their flight, Moon's thoughts drifted back to the valley. What had happened there? What had Valrath done? She had felt the energy surge, the hum that had filled the air, and then the impossibility of her resurrection. It had been no ordinary magic or science. There was something ancient about it. "Joran," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly is happening? Why did Valrath save me? Why did he bring me back?" Joran's expression grew somber, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know, but I think it's connected to you, to something you've awakened in him. Valrath isn't just any dragon. He's a guardian, a keeper of something that the Council has tried to keep hidden. I've been studying them for years. The Council, they've been using creatures like him for centuries, manipulating their power. But it's never been about just the dragons. They've been after something bigger." Moon's heart skipped a beat. "Something bigger?" Joran nodded, his face pale in the moonlight. "You've heard of the Ancients, right? The ones who came before the Council. The ones who were destroyed in the wars. The ones who left behind their legacy. The dragons. They were their protectors." Moon felt the weight of his words settle on her chest. The Ancients. She had heard whispers. Rumors passed among the few remaining rebel cells, but it was all shrouded in mystery. No one really knew the truth. Not for certain. "What do you mean, protectors?" Moon asked, her voice trembling with curiosity and fear. What were they protecting? Joran's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and dread. Something that could change everything. Something the Council fears more than anything else. A power that could bring an end to their rule. The dragons? Valrath specifically, they've been guarding it. But it's not just about the dragons anymore, Moon. It's about you. Moon felt a chill race down her spine. She had thought the worst was behind her. The execution, the chaos. But now, with Joran's words hanging in the air, She realized that the real fight was only just beginning. Before she could respond, Valrath let out a low growl, pulling her out of her thoughts. The dragon's eyes darted to the sky, and Moon followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. A massive storm had begun to form in the distance, swirling clouds gathering like an ominous omen. "We need to move now," Joran urged, his voice sharp with urgency. "That storm is no ordinary one. It's a signal. Someone knows we're here." Moon's heart pounded as Valrath veered to the right, flying straight toward the storm. The wind whipped against her face, and the temperature dropped sharply as the storm's front lines reached them. But she knew now that there was no turning back. The council was coming, and something even more dangerous was waiting for them in the heart of the storm. Chapter 4: The Eye of the Storm. The wind howled like a living thing, thrashing against Moon and Joran as Valrath ascended through the gathering storm. The dragon's wings beat fiercely against the turbulent air, his golden eyes narrowing as he fought to maintain altitude. The storm was more than just a weather phenomenon. It was alive with dark, crackling energy, and Moon could feel the strange pulse that radiated from it, a pulse that seemed to call to them. "What is that?" Moon shouted over the roar of the wind, clutching tightly to Valrath's spine. Joran's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and recognition. "It's not just a storm. It's a manifestation, a signal, a warning. And it's connected to us?" Moon's confusion deepened. "To us? What does that mean?" Before Joran could answer, a burst of lightning crackled from the storm's center, striking with the force of a thunderclap. The blinding light made Moon wince, but Valrath didn't flinch. The dragon's wings beat faster, pushing through the storm, his massive form undeterred by the violent weather. "It's trying to stop us," Joran muttered under his breath, the panic evident in his voice. The council must have triggered it. They knew we'd head this way. Suddenly, the storm seemed to part, as though an invisible force had pushed back the clouds. A massive structure emerged from the chaos, hovering in the center of the storm like a silent sentinel. It was a black spire, impossibly tall, its jagged form twisting upward, piercing the storm clouds themselves. The spire was surrounded by swirling vortexes of energy, dark tendrils that danced and flickered like lightning caught in a net. "That's it," Joran whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. "The Nexus." Moon felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "The Nexus?" she repeated. "What is it?" Joran didn't answer at first, his gaze fixed on the spire. "The Nexus is where everything began," he said, his voice distant, like he was speaking to himself more than to her. "It's the last remnant of the ancients, the power they left behind. The council doesn't want anyone to know about it. They've kept it hidden for centuries. But it's here, Moon. It's always been here." Moon's mind raced. The ancients, the dragons, the power that the council feared. Everything was coming together in ways she couldn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. They were heading straight for something far more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. Valrath's wings beat harder, his muscles straining against the weight of the storm as they neared the Nexus. The spire seemed to draw them in, as though it were pulling them closer with an unseen force. Moon felt the strange energy growing stronger as they got closer, her skin tingling as if the very air was charged with power. "We're too close," Joran shouted, his voice laced with panic. "We have to pull back, Moon. If we get too close, the storm will pull us and drag us under." But Valrath didn't flinch. His golden eyes locked onto the spire, unwavering. He was moving faster now, his wings cutting through the air like blades, as though the dragon had made up his mind. This wasn't just a random flight. Valrath was heading toward the Nexus with purpose. Moon could feel the connection between herself and the dragon strengthening, a bond that transcended logic or reason. She knew Valrath wasn't acting out of instinct alone. He was guiding them, pulling them toward something they needed to find, something she had to understand, or they would all be lost. And then, as the spire loomed directly above them, the storm erupted in a final cataclysmic burst. The air crackled with energy, a blinding flash of light filling the sky. Moon's heart raced as the storm seemed to collapse inward, a massive vortex of dark power spiraling down toward the Nexus, toward them. "Hold on!" Joran screamed, his voice lost in the roar of the storm. Valrath let out a deafening roar, his body surging upward at the last moment, narrowly avoiding the swirling vortex of energy. For a moment, it seemed as though the storm would consume them entirely, but then something changed. The vortex of energy broke apart, as if reacting to Valrath's presence. The tendrils of dark power snapped away, retreating into the spire, leaving a calm stillness in their wake. Moon blinked, disoriented. They had made it. Somehow, they were no longer in the eye of the storm, but hovering in the air, suspended in a strange, surreal calm. The Nexus stood before them, its black spire towering above, pulsating with an otherworldly light. The storm had ceased, leaving only an eerie silence. Valrath hovered in the air, his massive form still and watchful. Moon could feel the energy from the spire radiating outward, its pull undeniable. "This is it," Joran said, his voice trembling. "This is where it all comes together. The Nexus is alive with the power of the ancients. And it's here that we'll find the answers to everything. The truth about the Council, the dragons, and you." Moon's heart raced. She looked at the spire, her eyes wide. This was it, the place where everything she had fought for, everything she had lost, would finally make sense. But as they descended toward the Nexus, a dark shadow swept over them, casting the spire in a momentary gloom. Moon's eyes widened as she saw what was coming. A fleet of Council ships emerging from the clouds, their guns trained on them. They had found them. "They're here," Joran said, his voice grim. "They're not going to let us reach the Nexus. We need to act fast." Moon's gaze locked onto the approaching ships, the sense of inevitability crashing over her. The Council was closing in, and they wouldn't stop until she was dead again. But the spire, the Nexus, was the key. Whatever secrets it held, whatever power it contained, she had to reach it. She had to know what it meant for her, for the galaxy, for everything. Valrath growled low in his throat, his golden eyes narrowing as he looked at the oncoming ships. The dragon shifted, his wings flaring, ready to fight. "We fight," Moon whispered, her voice filled with resolve. Together, they would face the Council. And together, they would uncover the truth that had been buried for centuries. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. The fleet of Council ships loomed closer, their sleek, dark forms cutting through the stillness of the storm's aftermath. Moon's heart hammered in her chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had barely escaped death once already, and now she was being pulled into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. The Nexus was before her, its pulse growing stronger, resonating with an ancient power that made the air vibrate. But the Council would not let them reach it. The fleet moved into formation, weapons powered up, engines humming with deadly intent. Moon's gaze swept across them. No negotiation, no mercy. She knew what they were capable of. They would destroy everything in their path to stop her. To stop them. "Valrath," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the approaching ships. "Can you take us in? Can you break through them?" The dragon's golden eyes flicked to her, an intelligence that transcended animal instinct shining within them. He let out a low rumble, his powerful wings still as he prepared for their next move. The air around him shimmered with energy as the connection between them deepened, the weight of their shared purpose growing heavier. Valrath wasn't just carrying her to the Nexus anymore. They were both heading there for a reason that had yet to reveal itself fully. Joran's voice broke through her thoughts. "They'll try to flank us. We can't outrun them, but we can fight. We're not just running anymore. We're standing our ground." Moon looked to Joran, his face grim with determination. "We need to hold them off long enough to reach the Nexus," he said, a plan forming in his eyes. "Once we're inside, they can't follow. The Nexus is sealed, but only if we open the door." Moon felt a rush of understanding. This was it. The Nexus wasn't just a place of power. It was a place of choice. And only someone with the right connection could unlock it. She was that someone. "Then let's make sure we get there," Moon said, the resolve in her voice stronger than she had ever felt before. Valrath let out a roar so powerful that it echoed across the sky. His wings beat in unison with the pulse of the Nexus, and with a sudden surge, the dragon shot forward like an arrow, heading straight toward the fleet. The first blast from the Council ships came a moment too late. Valrath dove, wings folding in to plummet like a comet, narrowly avoiding the laser fire that painted the air with deadly light. Moon clenched her teeth, her hands tight on Valrath's scales as the dragon weaved through the oncoming barrage, his speed and agility unmatched. The ships tried to pivot, but Valrath's maneuverability was unparalleled. The storm, once an obstacle, now seemed to part for them, as if guiding them through the chaos. "We need to break their formation," Jorn shouted, pulling a small blaster from his belt. Moon looked over her shoulder, seeing the ships closing in, their laser cannons lighting up again. They would have to fight. "Keep them off us," she yelled to Jorn. He nodded grimly, lifting his blaster and firing into the distance, striking the nearest ship with precise shots. The Council ships retaliated immediately, but Valrath's speed kept them on the defensive. Every turn, every dive, every sudden rise kept the ships guessing, scrambling to adjust. But there were too many. More ships appeared from the cloud banks, cutting off their escape routes. The odds were closing in. Moon's heart pounded, but she held her focus, her eyes fixed on the glowing Nexus spire ahead. It was drawing closer. They were almost there. They had to make it. Valrath let out another roar, shaking the sky, and for a moment the ships faltered. It was as if the dragon's cry echoed into the very fabric of the storm, sending a wave of unease through the pursuing fleet. Moon's eyes widened as she saw something stir in the storm, a flicker of ancient light, a flash of something alive, something waiting. "Moon!" Jorn shouted. "We have to move now. The Nexus will reject us if we don't." The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. The Nexus wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a test. It had always been waiting for someone who could unlock its power. And that someone had always been her. "Valrath," Moon whispered, "take us in." Without hesitation, the dragon surged forward, his wings folding as he dove toward the Nexus. The Council ships fired in rapid succession, the deadly lasers streaking through the air. One blast hit Valrath's wing, and he let out a pained growl, but he didn't falter. He was already too close, too determined to stop. With a final, massive beat of his wings, Valrath broke through the barrier of ships and sailed directly toward the Black Spire. The world seemed to bend as they neared it, the energy from the Nexus pulling at them like a magnet. Then, as they reached the spire, something extraordinary happened. The very air shimmered, and the space around them seemed to warp. Time stretched, and for a heartbeat, Moon saw everything. The Council's lies, the truth of the ancients, the battles fought and lost, the power that had been sealed away. It all rushed through her mind in a blinding wave. She was connected to the Nexus, and the Nexus was alive in her. Without warning, the spire's surface began to open, a vast door of light appearing before them, glowing with a deep, ancient power. The Council ships fired one last volley. But before the blast could strike, the Nexus pulsed with such force that the ships were thrown backward, their weapons useless. The dragon, Jorn, and Moon were engulfed in a swirling light. Then, there was silence. The door to the Nexus had opened. Moon felt herself drawn inside, her body weightless as the light enveloped her. And then, nothing. The cold, harsh reality of the storm, the ships, and the battle outside faded into oblivion. She was no longer in the storm, no longer in the fight. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere beyond the Council. Somewhere beyond the galaxy. A voice echoed through the void, soft yet commanding. "You are the last, the first, the chosen." The light swirled around her as the ancient power of the Nexus embraced her, and with it a promise. You will change everything. The ending of her journey was only the beginning of something far greater.